There was a night when The Tonight Show, the show built on laughter, fell completely silent. Johnny Carson, the man who could make millions smile, suddenly had tears in his eyes, and it all began when Jack Lemmon said just 7 words. It was a night no one in television history could ever forget. The stage of The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson, sparkled like always. The famous cityscape backdrop glowed behind Johnny's desk. The audience buzzed with excitement, and the familiar theme music echoed through the studio. It was another ordinary night in late-night television, or at least, that's what everyone thought. Johnny Carson, the undisputed king of late night, sat comfortably behind his iconic wooden desk wearing his classic grin. For years, millions of Americans had ended their day listening to Johnny's quick wit, sharp humor, and effortless charm. He wasn't just a host, he was part of their family. A friend who made the world seem lighter no matter how hard the day had been. But that night, November 3rd, 1980, something happened that even Johnny didn't see coming. Something that turned laughter into silence and comedy into one of the most emotional, unforgettable moments ever broadcast on television. His guest that evening was none other than Jack Lemmon, one of Hollywood's most beloved actors, known for timeless classics like Some Like It Hot, The Apartment, and Mr. Roberts. Jack wasn't just any guest. He was an old friend, a regular on The Tonight Show, a man Johnny admired deeply, not only for his incredible talent, but for his warmth, kindness, and humility that shone through every time he spoke. The atmosphere was joyful, easygoing, and full of laughter. Johnny and Jack joked about old Hollywood days, shared behind-the-scenes stories, and traded playful jabs the way only close friends could. Their chemistry was electric, 2 legends effortlessly entertaining America without even trying. The audience laughed. The band chuckled. Johnny leaned back, sipping from his coffee mug, smiling that unmistakable Carson smile. Everything was perfect. Just another night of jokes, applause, and feel-good television. And then, without warning, the entire tone of the show changed. Jack Lemmon leaned forward slightly. His expression softened. His playful grin faded into something serious, almost nervous. Johnny noticed immediately. He tilted his head, curious, waiting for the punchline that never came. Then Jack paused for a brief moment, just long enough for the audience to feel that something big was coming. He looked straight at Johnny with eyes that seemed to hold years of untold emotion, and then he said 7 simple words that stopped the entire room cold. "Johnny, I need to tell you something." The studio audience went silent. The laughter that had filled the air seconds earlier vanished instantly. Even the band members stopped moving. It was as if the entire world had frozen in that exact moment. Johnny's trademark smile faded slightly. His eyebrows lifted. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't a setup for a joke. Johnny leaned forward, sensing something real, something personal. "Uh-oh," he said with a small laugh, trying to keep the mood light. "That sounds serious." But Jack didn't laugh. He just nodded softly. In that instant, you could feel the tension through the television screen. The people in the audience looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh or stay quiet. The cameramen exchanged nervous glances. No one, not the crew, not the producers, not even Johnny himself, knew what was coming next. Johnny's hands, usually relaxed on his desk, tightened slightly. His face, always in control, now showed curiosity mixed with concern. Jack Lemmon, one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood, sat in silence for a moment. You could see the emotion building in his eyes. Not sadness exactly, but something deeper. Gratitude, pain, reflection. And that was when everyone realized this wasn't a story about fame, or a movie, or a funny behind-the-scenes anecdote. Something much more personal was about to be shared. In all of Johnny Carson's years as host, he had experienced thousands of interviews, celebrities promoting films, comedians cracking jokes, musicians performing their songs. But this was different. This was raw, human, real. And when Jack finally began to speak again, what came out would bring the most powerful man in late-night television to tears, and create one of the most emotional moments ever aired on The Tonight Show. Because on that night, November 3rd, 1980, 7 simple words changed everything. "Johnny, I need to tell you something." No one could have predicted that a talk show meant for laughter would turn into a heartfelt confession that would leave the audience, and Johnny himself, speechless. It was the night the laughter stopped, and emotion took over. And from that moment forward, The Tonight Show would never be remembered quite the same way again. To understand why those 7 words hit so hard, you first have to understand what Johnny Carson and Jack Lemmon truly meant to each other. They weren't just another host and guest pairing on late-night television. They were friends, genuine old-school Hollywood friends, the kind who shared not just laughter but respect, admiration, and years of history. Both men had come from humble beginnings. Johnny, a small-town boy from Nebraska, had started as a radio performer before climbing his way to become America's most beloved talk show host. His charm, wit, and cool composure made him a television icon. But behind the cameras, Johnny Carson was a deeply private man, intelligent, sensitive, and often guarded. He could make millions laugh but rarely let anyone see the man behind the smile. Jack Lemmon was different, but in many ways, the same. He came from modest roots in Massachusetts, worked tirelessly in theater and film, and earned a reputation as one of Hollywood's finest actors. His ability to make audiences laugh and cry in the same scene made him one of a kind. But beyond his talent, Jack was known for something rarer: his heart. He carried a quiet kindness and humility that shone through even when the cameras stopped rolling. That was what made their bond so special. Johnny and Jack weren't just 2 famous entertainers. They were 2 men who understood each other. Johnny admired Jack's depth, his honesty, and the way he could bring warmth into any room. Jack admired Johnny's intelligence, timing, and his ability to hold an entire nation in the palm of his hand night after night. Whenever Jack appeared on The Tonight Show, it was never just another celebrity interview. It was like watching 2 old friends catching up, teasing each other, reminiscing, and sharing stories that felt genuine and unrehearsed. Their conversations flowed naturally, filled with laughter, warmth, and nostalgia. But that night, November 3rd, 1980, the energy felt different. Johnny had planned everything like always. Start with light banter, talk about Jack's new movie, throw in a few jokes, and maybe end with one of Jack's funny behind-the-scenes stories. It was supposed to be another smooth, entertaining segment, but television, like life, has its unscripted moments. Moments that can't be planned or predicted, and that's exactly what happened. As Johnny cracked a light joke, the audience burst into laughter, but Jack didn't join in. Instead, he leaned forward slightly in his chair. His smile faded into something softer, almost trembling. His eyes glistened as though he was holding something back. Johnny noticed immediately. He had interviewed thousands of people, and he could read emotion like a book. He saw it. That shift in Jack's expression, the look of someone who wasn't acting. This wasn't performance. This was real. Then Jack spoke, his voice quieter, slower, and filled with sincerity. "Johnny, I never got the chance to thank you." The air in the studio changed instantly. The audience, moments ago laughing freely, fell into a heavy silence. You could almost hear the hum of the lights above the stage. People looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh, clap, or wait. Even Johnny's crew, sitting just off camera, froze in place. Johnny himself didn't move. His expression softened. His usual smirk vanished. He looked at Jack carefully, searching his friend's eyes for context. This wasn't a setup for a joke. There was no punchline coming. It was one of those rare live TV moments when time seemed to stop. Jack took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly. "There's something I've carried for a long time," he said, looking down for a moment before meeting Johnny's eyes again. "Something I should have said to you years ago." Johnny, who always knew how to handle any situation, awkward guests, technical glitches, live audience mishaps, suddenly found himself speechless. His hands tightened around his pen. His body leaned forward almost instinctively, as if he knew whatever Jack was about to say would mean something deeply personal. The crowd, the cameras, the noise, it all faded into the background. In that moment, it wasn't a TV show anymore. It was one man finally opening his heart to another, on live television, and Johnny Carson, the man who had made America laugh for decades, sat completely still, waiting to hear what his friend had been holding inside for so long. No one could have predicted that those words, "I never got the chance to thank you," would lead to one of the most heartfelt and unforgettable moments ever seen on The Tonight Show. The jokes stopped. The laughter faded. What remained was something far more powerful, a moment of truth between two legends. Jack Lemmon continued speaking, and every word carried a weight that hung in the air like something sacred. The audience sat in complete silence, sensing that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something real. Jack's tone wasn't theatrical. It wasn't rehearsed. It was raw, trembling with emotion. Even the cameras seemed to zoom in a little closer, as if the moment itself demanded everyone's full attention. Jack began to tell a story that no one had ever heard before. Not the public, not the producers, not even most of his closest friends. He said that years ago, during one of the darkest chapters of his life, Johnny Carson had been there for him, quietly, compassionately, and without ever telling a soul. He explained that back in the mid-1970s, when the world saw him as one of Hollywood's brightest stars, he was secretly falling apart inside. Behind the golden smile and the Academy Awards, Jack Lemmon was fighting a battle that few people knew about: alcoholism. He tried to hide it, of course. He hid it behind charm, behind work, behind the comforting excuse that it's just part of the business. But late at night, when the cameras stopped rolling and the lights went out, he felt the crushing weight of his addiction. He told the audience that there were nights he couldn't sleep, mornings he couldn't face, and moments when he wasn't sure who he was anymore. And through it all, the people around him saw the actor, the entertainer, but Johnny saw the man. Jack paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. His eyes glistened under the studio lights as he looked at Johnny and said softly, "You probably don't even remember this, Johnny, but I do. I remember it every day." Johnny sat still, not saying a word. Jack continued. He recalled one night after a show, years earlier, when Johnny had invited him backstage. There was no audience, no cameras, no laughter. Just two friends standing under the dim glow of the studio hallway lights. Johnny, always observant, had noticed that Jack wasn't himself. His jokes felt forced, his eyes tired, his spirit heavy, and instead of pretending not to see it, as most people in Hollywood would have done, Johnny chose compassion. Jack's voice cracked as he recounted that moment. "You pulled me aside, and you looked me right in the eyes," Jack said, his voice trembling. "And you told me, 'You're too good a man, Jack, don't lose yourself.'" That one sentence, Jack explained, hit him harder than anything anyone had ever said. It wasn't a lecture. It wasn't advice. It was a friend reminding him of who he really was. That moment became the spark that pushed Jack toward recovery. He went home that night, looked in the mirror, and realized that if someone like Johnny Carson, a man he respected more than almost anyone, could see something good in him, then maybe he could find that version of himself again. Johnny never spoke of it afterward. He never mentioned it on air, never took credit, never sought acknowledgement. He just did what true friends do. He cared, quietly, without expectation, and now, years later, on national television with millions of people watching, Jack Lemmon was finally ready to say the words he had carried for so long. "Johnny," he said softly, voice trembling, "you saved my life, and I never said thank you." The audience gasped. You could feel their emotion ripple through the room. Some people in the crowd had tears in their eyes. Johnny blinked several times, trying to hold himself together. He looked down at his desk, fidgeted with his pencil, then looked back up at Jack. The man who had made America laugh for decades suddenly seemed fragile, human. He tried to brush it off at first, whispering with a faint, shaky smile, "Well, that's what friends are for." But his voice cracked halfway through, his lips quivered, and then for the first time in Tonight Show history, Johnny Carson had no words, the man who could fill silence with jokes, charm, and quick wit, the man who had interviewed presidents, legends, and stars, sat there completely speechless. His eyes were wet, his composure gone. For a long, breathless moment, neither man spoke. The studio audience didn't make a sound. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It was real life. One man thanking another for saving him when the world wasn't looking. And in that silence, millions of viewers watching at home saw something they'd never seen before. Johnny Carson, the king of late night, being reminded of the quiet power of kindness and friendship. That night, the laughter stopped, but something far more meaningful took its place. The show didn't go on as planned that night. Johnny Carson, usually the master of keeping every moment under control, sat there quietly, his famous grin replaced by a look of deep emotion. For a long, almost uncomfortable pause, neither he nor Jack spoke. The silence stretched through the studio like a heartbeat. You could hear the faint hum of the cameras, the rustle of the audience shifting in their seats, and nothing else. Then, without saying a word, Johnny reached across his desk and gently placed his hand over Jack Lemmon's. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't for the cameras. It was pure instinct. One friend comforting another in a moment that transcended television. The entire studio was still. No laughter. No applause. No jokes to break the tension. Just emotion, honest, human, and rare. Johnny looked down, then up again at Jack, his eyes glistening. His voice, usually steady and confident, came out softer, fragile, as if he was afraid the moment might shatter if he spoke too loudly. "Jack," he said quietly, "I think you just gave me the best moment this show has ever had." For a second, there was silence again. And then the entire studio burst into applause. The audience, who had been holding their breath, finally let it out in an emotional wave. Some clapped through tears. Others simply stood overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. It wasn't just a talk show anymore. It had become something deeper, something unforgettable. It wasn't about show business. It wasn't about ratings. It was about two men reminding the world that kindness, gratitude, and friendship still mattered. Johnny tried to continue the show, but everyone could see the tears still glistening in his eyes. Jack, too, smiled through emotion, clearly moved by what had just happened. That night, no one left the studio the same. People walked out quietly, wiping their eyes, knowing they had witnessed something that couldn't be repeated. Not by script, not by acting, not by any amount of planning. The next day, the newspapers called it the moment that stopped the Tonight Show. Reporters described how the audience sat frozen, how Johnny, the man who had made a career out of humor, had been rendered speechless. And they called it one of the most genuine moments ever seen on television. From that day forward, Johnny Carson and Jack Lemmon's bond became legendary in Hollywood circles. They had always been friends, but now their friendship represented something greater. A reminder that beneath the glamour of fame, there are real people with real hearts. Clips of that night were replayed over and over. Viewers said they could feel the sincerity through the screen. Even decades later, people still describe getting chills when Jack's trembling voice says, "Johnny, you saved my life, and I never said thank you." It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't planned. It wasn't entertainment. It was truth. In later interviews, Johnny was asked about that moment many times. He never bragged about it, never told it as a funny story. But he did admit that it stayed with him for the rest of his life. He once said softly, "You never expect something like that to happen on air." Jack didn't just thank me. He reminded everyone watching that fame means nothing if you forget to care about people. That sentence perfectly captured the heart of the moment. Because that's what the world saw that night. Not a host and a guest, but two friends being human in front of millions. Jack Lemmon continued to act for years after, delivering performances that carried even more depth and compassion. People who worked with him often said, Jack never forgot that night. He always talked about how much it meant to him, and Johnny Carson, already a legend, became something even greater. He wasn't just the funniest man on television anymore. He was a man who showed the world that behind every joke and smile, there's a heart that feels deeply. That night on November 3rd, 1980, wasn't just another episode of The Tonight Show. It was a reminder that behind every laugh, every celebrity, every story, there's a human being who sometimes just needs someone to notice, to care, to listen, and all it took were 7 simple words. "Johnny, I need to tell you something." Those words turned laughter into tears, television into truth, and friendship into history. Even today, more than 40 years later, fans still revisit that moment. Not for the glamour, not for nostalgia, but for how real it felt. Because for once, in a world full of performances, 2 men dropped the act and just felt. And that's why, on that night, Johnny Carson stopped The Tonight Show. Not because he had to, but because some moments are too powerful, too human, to rush through. That night proved one thing. Behind every joke, there's a heart that feels. Behind every legend, there's a friend who cares. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it, because sometimes all it takes are 7 words to change someone's life.